streaming us over. And we are live. Welcome, mighty mystery fans. I'm your on-air host, Sara DiVello, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Ausma Zehanat Khan, who will be telling us all about her book in the mystery genre. And crazily, Ausma also writes a fantasy series. What? So we're going to be talking about that as well. So Ausma, welcome to A Mighty Place. Tell us about your book.
Thank you so much. Well, my book is called A Deadly Divide, and I'm just going to hold it up real quick.
Hold it up.
And it's the fifth in a police procedural crime series. Features a pair of Canadian detectives named Isa Khatak and Rachel Getty, and they work for this special policing unit called community policing, which I think is ever more apt in today's environment. And what they do is they investigate murders in minority communities, and they try to represent this very difficult mandate, partly as representing the needs and interests of minority communities, but also representing law enforcement to those communities.
Oh, I absolutely love that. That's so fascinating and so needed. Tell us, how did you come to write this and why?
Well, I'm a lifelong fan of both crime fiction and crime TV. So I've always been, all my life, since I was a kid, I've been reading mysteries, and a lot of them featured these very handsome, brooding detectives with these demons in their past. And I just became addicted to that. And I thought, why can't I write a handsome, brooding detective of my own? I should give it a try. But I particularly wanted to write it because I hadn't seen a lot of people from backgrounds like my own. So my detective, he's Canadian, but his background, he's South Asian. So he's a Pakistani from the ethnic group of Pashtuns or Pathans, which is the same as myself. And I wanted to write those kinds of characters into this genre where I felt they were very underrepresented. And then to talk about the issues that affect those communities so deeply, but from the inside, rather than an external perspective commenting on them. And then I wanted to have this really fun, troubled partnership duo where these two detectives, one man and one woman, become close, they grow together as they're solving these very thorny and complicated crimes.
Oh, Ausma, I absolutely love this. And it's so needed because you and I share a similar lifelong love of mysteries and brooding detectives and crime TV and crime books. And I have noticed that they often do have these double speckled casts, but there isn't a lot of diversity. So it's fantastic that you're bringing that in. So thank you for that. And bringing it in from such an organic, authentic perspective, because that is your background.
That's right.
And that gives you unique voice, unique perspective, all of which is so needed. This is fantastic. So you're based in Canada, right?
So I'm Canadian, but I live in the United States. And I actually recently, a year ago, I became an American citizen. So I'm trying to learn to think of myself as a dual citizen of both countries. I've lived in the States for 15 years, so I have to get accustomed to this now.
Yay. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A related and interesting time to be here, as I think many Americans are harboring fantasies of fleeing to Canada, myself included.
I always think about the other passport, I have to admit.
Exactly. So I just want to say a very warm welcome to our audience. And this is your time to ask Ausma anything you like about her writing, about her books, about her characters. What questions do you have about the genre or the process? This is your time. So feel free to just type them in the questions and I will relay them right to Ausma and she will answer them live. That's what we're all about here. So also let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to know. And as you're thinking about those questions, I'm going to just ask a few of my own. So Ausma, I know you said that you were a lifelong mystery fan. So what were your favorite mystery books to read growing up?
So I was actually born in England. So I started with British fiction and I would be reading those Enid Blyton series, The Secret Seven, The Famous Five, all of those, The Island of Adventure, those kinds of stories. And then when we moved to Canada, I really discovered other writers. I got into Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, all of those stories. But my favorite of all time is the Golden Age crime writer, Ngaio Marsh. Ooh. So I read all 32 of her novels, and she actually has my favorite detective, Inspector Roderick Allen, who's, of course, fitting into this mold of the handsome and brooding detective but those mysteries are very clear police procedurals, but they had a lot of literary aspects to them too, which I found really interesting. So I learned that you could meld these things. And now I think I read everybody out there who's writing. And I particularly love long-term series in mystery. So I love Louise Penny's books. I love Charles Finch, Charles Todd, you name any of those. But I'm also making an effort now that Crime Writers of Color is an organization and has its own website to try myself to read more diversely. So I'm reading Kelly Garrett and Rachel Housel Hall and a whole bunch of new authors like that too.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I love that. And I love that there's new focus and new awareness on reading authors of color and getting those more diverse voices out there. It's been fantastic to learn about them and to read them and to be interviewing them as well on this series. Ausma, I cannot go any further without sharing just a few of your absolutely rave reviews.
Oh, thank you.
You received a starred and boxed review from Publishers Weekly, who says, outstanding. Khan perceptively explores who fear can quickly erupt. I think that means they meant to say how fear can quickly erupt into violence. Ooh, that's so true. Booklist raves, Khan masterfully weaves story-driving character development and pitch-perfect investigation with timely social commentary on the impact of cultural tensions. Yes to that. Thank you, Booklist. While Kirkus says Khan peoples her police procedural with believably nuanced characters, ooh, to highlight the consequence of hate. The tension never lets down. You were, of course, a Crime Reads Best Book of the Year. Crime Reads saying Ausma Zehanat Khan procedurals have redefined the landscape of Canadian crime writing. What an incredible honor to redefine a landscape. Ausma, that's amazing. They go on to say this is a must read for anyone who believes in crime fiction as a space to both process trauma and sound the call for action. Oh my gosh, Crime Reads. I absolutely love that. Process trauma and sound the call for action. So topical, so important, not just now, but always. You have gotten amazing reviews from the Globe and Mail, who say that you have established yourself as one of the genre's most thoughtful practitioners with great intelligence and sensitivity. You portray the ease of online radicalization and the ways in which ideological divides cement into far more violent ones. LitHub says A Deadly Divide feels like a homecoming. Shelf Awareness says that it is fast-paced, expertly plotted. I want to get into that because I want to know how you expertly plot. I could go on and on. There are literally pages here. You've also received starred reviews from Booklist, Publishers Weekly in the past. Oh my goodness, Ausma, you're amazing. We're so honored to have you. So let's get right.
You're very kind. Thank you so much.
No, this is fantastic. So let's get right into the craft of it, because you have received such praise for it. So tell us about your process of expertly plotting. Please enlighten us.
So my books are all based on, there's a murder that occurs in every book, but they're all linked to international human rights issues. So when I'm thinking about these issues, I have to do a lot of research if I'm going to write them convincingly and credibly and still manage to turn that into fiction. So first I do about 6 months of reading, but I have a background in international human rights law, so I keep my reading in the field current anyway. But when I know I want to write about a particular issue, say the Syrian refugee crisis, which is in my 4th book, then I read really extensively just on that subject. And as I'm reading, I'm picking up things that I think, oh, this would be great in the novel. This is a voice that should be amplified, should be part of the story. And then once that reading process is finished and I figured out what I'm going to draw from, I make a very detailed running scene outline for my book, which I actually learned about from the crime novelist Elizabeth George. She'd written a book called Right Away, and that's kind of my Bible for how to plot.
Ooh.
And so I do this running scene outline where I break down everything that's going to happen plot-wise from beginning to the end of the novel, because I'm not one of those writers who can match up my clues at the end if I haven't thought about it all the way through. And so I don't mess up my timeline or my suspects and things like that. So I plot very specifically in a lot of detail. But then as I'm writing, as every writer will say the same thing, your characters take on a life of their own and they want to do things that you hadn't planned for them to do. And so I try to leave some room to have that be flexible and respond to those story ideas as they come along.
I absolutely love that. Let's go a little deeper. So in the 6 months that you're researching, what does that research process look like? Are you reading the news and immersing yourself in knowledge of, for instance, the Syrian refugee crisis? Or does something catch your eye and then you go really deep on one particular person's crises? Or what does that look like?
So it's a combination of that and a number of other things. I always start with human rights reports from organizations like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch. I read everything that they're saying because they do a lot of survivor testimony, people who've been on the ground, and they report their circumstances. And that's always the most convincing in terms of characterization and voice. So I rely on that heavily. Then I go from there. I watch a lot of videos. I see a lot of interviews. I read a lot of books, both fiction and nonfiction. Fiction, so I can ground myself in the language and customs and culture of the people that I'm writing about. So I understand how they interpret themselves and what's important to them in terms of their language and their history and their concerns. And then nonfiction, so I have a really good understanding of the politics and the players and the many different points of view involved in an issue like that, like a global refugee crisis. And then I use my connections to try to interview people on all sides of the spectrum. So I'd be interviewing human rights lawyers, I'd be interviewing people who process refugees around the globe, border guards, police officers, refugees themselves, NGO workers. And when I've got those hundreds of stories in my head, then I begin to figure out what are the important themes I want to draw out and which characters could best represent and give life to those themes.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
It's intense. It's very intense.
Can we please hold and pan out while I genuflect to you? Because that is amazing. Wow, this is so thorough. And I think I am seeing why you have earned these starred reviews and this rave praise from every single industry outlet and press media outlets as well. So, okay, once you do that for 6 months, you're taking notes and you're letting that marinate in your head, then you start your plotting and drafting process. Is that right?
That's right.
And how long does that take you?
The running scene outline doesn't take long. The most it's ever taken me is 2 weeks. But sometimes I can do it in 3 days, depends on how well I know the subject. So for example, my first book, The Unquiet Dead, I was able to do that very quickly because that was the same material that I'd covered in my academic research. So I had a lot of familiarity with it and I could just knock out what I wanted to say. But with A Dangerous Crossing and A Deadly Divide, it took me a little bit longer to figure out how I want the story to be structured and how I can, and in A Deadly Divide, I actually have 2 plots. So that was more difficult because I had to weave those 2 plots together and leave one hanging at the end, but keep one resolved by the end so readers would be satisfied by it. So running scene outline doesn't take long, but the actual writing of chapters, sure, that takes a long time, between 4 to 6 months.
So you outline, when you say you outline the scenes, you outline all of the scenes from start to finish.
That's right. Beginning to end.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. I am sure that our audience is as amazed as I am. I just want to welcome everyone. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. Let us know what questions you have for Ausma. This is your time. You can ask her anything. This is absolutely incredible. The research process, amazing. Okay, so then you take 4 to 6 months then to write the chapters that you have outlined based on this research. And when you say that you take the time to learn the language and the culture and the thought processes, are you actually trying to learn Syrian?
Oh, you mean Arabic? No, I don't mean that. I didn't mean the actual tongue that they speak, but I mean the sort of the idiom, the ways in which they express themselves, what's important culturally, what are the cultural touchstones, what are the historical touchstones. So for example, if you're reading about the demolition of Syria by the Syrian regime, you'll often see the great historical figure of Salahuddin referenced. So I wanted to know, why is that? What role did he play? Why is he historically such an important figure for the Syrian people? And they think of him as a hero, as a warrior, as a person of great dignity and nobility. So then idiomatically, while you're writing the scenes for Syrian characters, that would be something very natural to draw upon as someone that they would look up to, or that some Syrians would look up to as an important historical figure. So those are the kind of details that I mean.
Oh, wow. Okay. Absolutely amazing. I want to welcome Robin Kol-Hamanoff, our star author interviewer on the women's fiction side and fiction in general. Absolutely incredible to have you here with us, Robin, as well. And Ausma, so you are really immersing yourself, for instance, in that Syrian refugee crisis and learning to get that historical and cultural framework so that you can write such a richly textured textured tale. So what has been the most surprising thing for you in that journey?
Well, with every book, it's something new. I think I always understand how much, no matter what community or background that you come from or what your particular circumstances are, how much we all have in common, how much our dreams are similar, that people just want safety, they want to raise their children, they want economic security, they want to be free of violence, oppression, and war. And their dreams can be, our dreams and their dreams are very similar. And so it reaffirms that common humanity that we all have, which is important, because when you see certain news stories, the other in those stories, it's so often demonized and represented as this unknowable creature. And I think when you delve deep into the humanities of others, you realize, of course, they're very knowable. And if you connect at this, as my detectives always do, both Rachel and Isa are always interacting with these other characters in these very human moments, and they're connecting at that very personal level. And so I think it's always an education for me about our assumptions about the other and how not to have those assumptions and how to deconstruct them.
Yeah, exactly. I so agree with you. And I think that tendency to other people, whether it is because of geography or cultural differences or racial or political or religious, or it could be so many things, but you're right. And I think traveling internationally and living internationally was sort of uniquely eye-opening for me in that. And not just to see how common we all are, and that we all want those same things. We all want to be safe. We all want to be healthy. At the end of the day, that's what really matters is health and your family, your loved ones, to make sure that you are safe, to make sure that you are well, to make sure that you have peace, that you're, we all want these sort of basic human rights and dignities. And also I think it's helpful to travel and live outside of the United States or wherever you're from, because it helps you to realize how the rest of the world sees you and your culture and how you see yourself.
Very important insights, exactly. And that experience, I think, always enriches writing. That sense of not being from a single place and having all these different lenses that you have to look through and give space to and give dignity and respect to. I think that really makes for richer writing and a richer process.
Exactly. And also richer living, just to see
Absolutely.
yourself as a citizen of the world.
Right.
So Ausma, tell us about hi, Deborah, welcome everybody. Any questions, please just type them. We're having so much fun chatting and I want to make sure I get to your questions as well. So do you arise with the sun? Do you flow effortlessly to your death where the words pour forth with ease, or are you sort of like clawing your way?
I think like so many people and so many writers, first I have to get the ordinary business of the household out of the way. So I'm not a super early riser, but I get up early so I can get those things done. So then my mind is clear and I can focus on my work. And I don't have kids, but I can't imagine how writers with kids also handle that other voice in their head all the time. So when that's all settled and I can come and sit down to my desk, when I'm on deadline, I write pretty consistently. And I find that the deadline is what motivates me to write, is my fear of breaching a contractual obligation. So I will, when I know, for example, a Deadly Divide is due at such and such date, I will write every day for at least 6 to 8 hours a day. I usually start around 10 because I first take care of my email and my social media. And then I write consistently till I can say that I've met my word count for the day. And then the next day I repeat it, but I look over what I've already written, I edit that, and then I go again. But I try to take, when I'm not under massive deadline pressure, I try to take the weekends off just so my brain has a little bit of time to rest and process what I've already done. And so new ideas have space to come in.
I love that. I love that. And I want to get to a question right over here. Rachel says, I was spoiled by the books releasing annually and each has such an important human rights focus. Ausma, are you planning additional books in the series? And if so, can you share the focus of your next one? Great question, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That is a great question. So for the moment, the series is on hiatus while I pursue a new project. But in A Deadly Divide, I left a major cliffhanger. So I would love to come back and resolve that cliffhanger. And the different issues that I've covered so far, I've looked at the Bosnian genocide, the Syrian refugee crisis, political prisoners in Iran, a mosque shooting in Quebec, Canada, and global terrorism. But other issues that I would really like to write about that I have some background in and I'm very interested in is I'd like to look at what's been happening in India with the national government's demonization of its minority populations. And I'm really interested in writing about the human rights situation in Kashmir, which has been, so we've been under lockdown for a few months, but Kashmir has been under lockdown by the Indian Army for years. And we don't know what's going on with the human rights of the people in Kashmir. We've had very little reporting from the field because there's such a massive lockdown there. So I'm really interested in sending Isa and Rachel to Kashmir to find out what's been going on. And I think I'd really like to have my detectives come to the United States and do a really American story. Maybe in Chicago, because I used to live in Chicago, or possibly Los Angeles, because I used to live in Los Angeles. So I'd be interested in those stories. I would really be focusing on the over-policing of minority communities and police brutality. So I have ideas. I just don't know what's coming next in terms of Isa and Rachel.
Oh my gosh, I love that answer. And thank you for that wonderful question from our audience. Please keep them coming. I will keep filtering them to you. Yeah, it's what's going on in Kashmir is of such great concern. When I was in India, I did not get to that particular region. But I mean, India is such a uniquely interesting culture and country and history. And I would absolutely sign up to read that book.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yes,
I'm gonna tell my editor that there is interest.
Please do. And Ausma, I have to say, so for those of you in the audience, we're all mystery fans right here, but Ausma also writes fantasy. What? So Ausma, tell us about that. Why do you write these two drastically different genres? What's that like for you?
It's a little bit crazy because for a time I was on this schedule where I had to write one of these books every year for, I think that went on for 4 years. And so I was writing 2 books a year and I was worn out and overworked and wondering why I had ever signed up for such a crazy endeavor. But in the end, now that it's done, I really feel the rewards of it and that sense of accomplishment. I wrote my crime series because I wanted to write about the tensions between different communities in the West. So that was interesting for me from the perspective of this Canadian Muslim detective who is from and of the West and have his lens on that picture. But that was kind of a speaking out to a Western audience. And I was always mediating my story through that particular lens. With my fantasy series, I was really interested in looking at Islamic history and the wide sweep of the Islamic civilization from Mecca to Afghanistan, for example, but in putting that entire world and all that world building into a fantasy landscape some 1,000 years in the future. And that was because I wanted to reflect on human rights issues within these communities, within our countries. For myself, for my parents' history lies through India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And I particularly wanted to write about what was happening in those communities in terms of women's rights, minority rights, and to have all of these stories connected through this thread of the sweeping Islamic civilization to pull on its touchstones, its mythologies, and make that a very exciting adventure with these female protagonists at the forefront. And so that was sort of more me speaking internally to my own community or the communities that I come from. So I had a very different lens. And I kind of, even though my fantasy series is so dark, it still for me was more freeing and a little bit more like I didn't have to put such a rein on myself about thinking who's reading it and how are they interpreting it. I could just let myself go a little bit more.
Oh, that makes so much sense. That's so interesting. When I was writing my first book, I had read that it was best to work with a critique partner who had no experience and no preconceived notions about your genre. So I worked with a fantasy writer, and prior to that, I actually had never read a fantasy book. But to be a better critique partner to him, I did read a bunch of fantasy books, and it's such a different way of thinking and such a different way of writing. So I'm just so fascinated that you can go back and forth between these two worlds.
Yeah, it's challenging, but it's been a lot of fun for me. At least in my case, I also read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and I have since I was a kid, and I love fantasy films and science fiction films. So it was like, oh, there's so much to do in this world. There's so much inventiveness. There's so much creativity. And in a lot of other spaces in fiction, there's not that much room for diverse voices and diverse histories. So if you look at science fiction and fantasy now and YA science fiction and fantasy, that's where you see that plurality of voices more than any other genre. So it's kind of very welcoming in that sense. And it's almost like we're recreating our histories there and our cultures there because there's no other place that we can do that. That's quite as open or as welcoming. So I found that interesting.
That is interesting. How fascinating. Yeah, I did not know that. We have a comment from the audience. Rena, one of our top community members, says Kashmir is beautiful and I have been there. Oh, Rena, that's so cool. So it sounds like Rena's going to be in line with me to when waiting for that next book, Ausma.
Oh yeah, I'd actually love to visit Kashmir too. I have a lot of family friends from Kashmir, and I have a really good friend that I was who's from Kashmir, living in Kashmir, that I had been in contact with for a long time. And then when the recent lockdown came, we haven't heard word one from her in over 6 months. Oh, no. So she has no access to social media. So we don't get a sense of what's happening on the ground as a result, except from a few very brave journalists there who've been able to get the word out about the Indian Army. So yeah, I'd love to go there. I'd love to see a happier future for Kashmir where they could have a referendum on their own future. And certainly there's a lot of material there for not just crime writing, but for Kashmiri people to tell their own stories.
Totally. It was interesting. I remember when I was in India and my tuk-tuk driver took me past the Prime Minister's palace. And I said, oh, it's amazing that you're so progressive. You know, I'm from America and we've never had a female leader, a female president. And here you have a female prime minister. And he was like, oh, she has no power. It's fine.
What part of India were you in?
That that conversation took place in Delhi.
Oh, okay. My parents are not far from there, where they were born in UP in the north, a town called Shahjahanpur, which is pretty close to Delhi and Lucknow. And that's a place where they speak this very sophisticated literary Urdu. India has over 100 languages. And then after the partition, they migrated to Pakistan, but their family roots
Oh.
actually lie in Afghanistan. So they have a complicated history that I've loved exploring in fiction.
Oh, wow. That is that. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's really cool. I flew over by myself and spent some time in Delhi. And then I met up with a friend who I had met in my yoga teacher training, who was spending 6 months at an ashram. And then we traveled around together.
Oh,
And
nice. That sounds amazing.
it was really amazing. And I can't wait to go back because I never made it down to Kerala. And I never made it up to Dharamsala. It's too big to do everything at once.
That's right. You need 10 trips to see India properly.
I really do. I really do. Rena says that she's from Lucknow. Oh, yay.
Oh, wonderful.
Very cool. Welcome, Rena. Let us know if you have any questions for Ausma as well. So Ausma, 2 questions. What is, because you have such a thoughtful approach to writing, what is, because we have so many writers in the audience, what is the best writing advice that you've ever gotten or learned that you would like to share with our audience? And what is some absolutely trash advice that you would like to stop the myth that should ever be happening?
Well, I don't know if this is trash advice, but I think this idea that there's one process that works for everyone is a myth. Everyone writes differently. Some people plot very seriously like me and produce something that they're satisfied with at the end, and other people achieve that result by not plotting at all and just writing very organically as they sit down, and that's fine too. Some people insist that you have to write every day, and if you don't, you're not a writer. And I don't write every day. I sometimes go 6 months without writing anything because I'm processing what I'm going to write next. I'm learning about it. I'm thinking about it. So I think that's bad advice. I think everyone has a process that works for them, and you have to experiment to figure out what your process is. The best advice, that's a good one. That's a good question. I think the best advice I've gotten is that, particularly for me, because I infuse so much research into my stories, is being told that sometimes less is more, that you don't have to put all your research into your books. You have to figure out what's important from that research. What's the most emotionally compelling and relevant? What's something that characters can actually work with and grow from? And so in my first book, my editor cut 25,000 words from my debut novel, The Unquiet Dead. And that felt like a wound to the heart. I took it so personally. I thought I would die. But when I looked at what she'd done, she was basically saying, we don't need this much detail about war crimes. You're going to flatten and terrify your readers. We just need to know the human story of what happened here. And when I looked back and saw her, her precision of how she'd edited my manuscript, I realized she was absolutely right. And I learned that lesson for every future book, that I don't have to cram in absolutely everything that I know into a story.
Oh my gosh. First of all, I am feeling that pain with you even now. I'm like, ow. And also as a complete research nerd and straight A student dork, I just want to say I love the research because I love all that. I'm just like, yum, 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 yum.
I love it too. I really enjoy it.
So how long was the book when you gave it to her, and how long did it end up being after that painful 25,000 word cut?
So it was about 125,000, and I think we got it down to around 98 or 99,000.
And how do you make that decision about whether it is a research for the nerds like me who just will love it, but for the rest of people who don't need it? How do you decide what is fat and what is not?
So when I wrote The Unquiet Dead, I didn't know the answer to that question. I wouldn't have been able to tell what's important to my story because I was just too new. And I had a lot to learn about the whole writing process and the editing process and that relationship between a writer and an editor. So then I did not know. I had to be taught and shown what works and what doesn't work. And that was a really valuable education. My editor's name at Minotaur was Elizabeth Lax, and she was absolutely amazing to work with.
Shout out to Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, the best. Never forget her. In fact, I dedicated A Dangerous Crossing to her. And since then, I went on to work with another absolutely lovely editor named Catherine Richards. And she's also got this steely-eyed precision, but also a real sense of the warmth of what you need in a book. Because a mystery novel is made up of so many things. It's not just the detectives and the clues and the suspects and the denouement. It's about all these moments of human connection and why you care about certain characters and you don't care about others, and you wish certain outcomes for some characters and you don't want those outcomes for others. Yes. So it's how to piece that whole, it's almost like a living thing that you have to nurture every part of it for it to come out as a successful book. But after that, in subsequent books, because I had studied carefully what Elizabeth was suggesting and had discussed with me, I began to understand that I might be really fascinated by morning to night prison conditions in a prison in Iran. But that's not
I
necessarily
am.
serving the mystery. So what part of that would be interesting to the mystery? And so more and more I've tried to be laser focused about my research.
Ooh, this is so interesting and so helpful, because I could see myself being like, but no, it's true. This is the schedule, and I can tell you because I researched it for 72 days. I went
Exactly.
in there with a sleeping bag and experienced it. We have another question from the audience. Rena would like to know: did you have any difficulty while researching for your book? Yeah, what about that? Because you're researching these really tough things.
Yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but I wrote Among the Ruins and A Dangerous Crossing back to back. So that was my book on the situation of political prisoners in Iran, and my book on not only what the Syrian refugee crisis, but also what was happening inside of Syria, meaning Assad's torture regime and this vast machinery of torture, what they called an industrial torture machine inside Syria. So I was immersed in these horrific human rights abuses for a year, reading them very closely. And that's the kind of material, once it's in your psyche, it never goes away. I still remember details of war crimes I read about Bosnia in the 1990s. So that kind of material soldiers itself to your mind, and then to your thoughts, and then to your heart. And I think in a way, it's kind of an injury. It's like a traumatic wound, not in the sense of the person who directly experiences the wound, but even the act of witnessing can sometimes be very dark, very painful. And so I didn't realize that, but I was seriously depressed while I was writing A Dangerous Crossing. And I didn't realize it was because I had been snowed in this world for so long, reading these horrors and then seeing this disconnect between the reality on the ground and how we were actually treating refugees around the globe. So I was really, really miserable. And I didn't feel any relief until the book was finished. And then I had to get out of that space for a while and just say that this was the little bit that I could do, was to write this book. And that gave me a little bit of a sense of relief, even knowing that there was so much more work for all of us to be doing around the globe. But to get away from that, I have to go back to family. I have to do things that are unconnected to my human rights work and my human rights research. I have to watch The Office on television several episodes in a row, or watch a comedy or something lighthearted. I have to go walk a dog. I have to pet a cat, things these things that call your parents, talk to your mom, feel a little bit better, and sort of refresh and renew, and then stay away from it for a little while to give it a chance to fade. If you've ever read the testimony of a rape survivor, for example, you need to get away from it, and you need to let your psyche heal, and then give yourself that little bit of clinical objectivity where you can understand what was important about that story and how to tell it appropriately. And the other thing that I find really, really difficult is when I do interviews. So one-on-one interviews with former refugees or torture survivors, or people who've lost their family members. For another project, I had interviewed the daughters of Srebrenica, whose family members, all the male family members, had been killed in the Srebrenica massacre in 1995. And the 25th anniversary just passed for that. And that's sort of the subject of The Unquiet Dead. And that conversation with those 5 girls I had to keep my composure because they were the ones who had suffered so much. But it was really, really difficult to interview them and to then tell the story afterwards. So I find those things difficult in the research process.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for that that answer, and thank you for that wonderful question, Rena. The work, I think we just have to pause and honor the incredible work that you do, Ausma, because this is not easy, for all of the reasons that you just listed. And it does have a very deep effect. And it's a very challenging balancing act to be able to keep going back into this darkness and these very, very painful topics, but to still keep a tender heart and an open heart to be able to tell these stories. And I think I see that not only in human rights work, but also in police work, right? When you see the worst of humanity, when you see abuse, violation, systematic rape, torture, it must be incredibly hard to be able to go into that world every day, and as a researcher, as a human rights activist, as a police officer, and then also not allow yourself to become hardened, not allow yourself to become escaping into addiction or whatever,
or get burned out in the
or
process,
get burned out,
particularly for police officers. Yes,
keep coming back. Rena says kudos to you, Ausma. Absolutely. And I mean, I remember when I was in college in the 90s reading about as well the what was going on in Bosnia and Croatia and Herzegovina. And it was, I mean, some of those things still stay with me as well. And also the aerial pictures of Assad's systemic torture and how many bodies they had estimated were, I mean, more recently had estimated were being mass buried in graves unidentified because of them in Assad's prisons in Syria. And it's really hard work. So thank you for this. Thank you for bringing a light to it, and thank you for bringing to shining a light to it, and for illuminating it, and telling these people's stories. This is so important. So thank you for that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. Thank you so much.
No, this is amazing. This is so important. So thank you for that. And one question that I always ask authors is, what do you want people to take from this? But I think you've been talking about that already, that you want people to learn and to see to see not these stories as others, but to see the humanity and the similarity that we all share.
And then to respond accordingly. So for example, the United States in 1 year only took in 11 refugees from Syria, and the global need was so great. So I'm hoping that if you read a book like A Dangerous Crossing, it affects what we think about our policies locally as well.
And what are some actions that we can take beyond voting in the big election in November? What are
Everyone
actions?
Vote.
Everyone vote. Everyone better vote, or I will personally come and kick your ass. No, but what are some actions that we can take? What is the most powerful way that we as individuals can activate and is it donations? Is it speaking out? Is it all of this? Is there something else? Tell us.
Those are all great options. One is obviously to inform yourself on the issues of the things that concern you, or things that you see in the news that are huge issues. So for example, in the last, I would say since 9/11 in the United States, there's been this push for a lot of anti-Muslim legislation. And it's kind of, that rhetoric has kind of died down now because of the pandemic, and the attention of the Republican Party is focused on other things. But other than that, we've seen this very steady stream of anti-Muslim propaganda in American politics. And I'm sure a lot of your readers are familiar with the term Islamophobia. So that in some ways is being legislated. We saw the Muslim ban, we saw issues like that. That affects my community. And those are important issues to be educated on and to vote against. But there's other communities, for example, Latino or Hispanic communities are very concerned, and as we all should be, about issues at the border, what's been happening with undocumented children. So knowing where your local politicians stand is on those issues. And if they're anti-human, intolerant, cruel, if you think back to World War II, turning away Jewish refugees who were fleeing Nazi Germany, we're not that far off from those types of policies now. It's just the lens that we shine on them is very different. So educating ourselves on those issues and then responding accordingly and putting pressure on our local, state, and national politicians, I think, is the most important thing that we could be doing.
Absolutely. And I think also being historically informed. So, people today would say we would never turn away, Jewish refugees. But if you replace the word Jewish with Muslim, that's what we're doing.
Right.
So it's like, it's not just getting stuck in that pattern. It's looking at what happened then and then thinking about what you're doing now and how you can be part of that. Aisha says that she would love to see your books made into movies. Aisha, you and me both. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Aisha also says, I hope we get more of your mystery series. Yes to that, Aisha. You and I, once again, think of the same things. Tell us about that. What would you think these would make better series, Netflix series, TV? Is it movie? Is it destined for the big screen? Tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Aisha, salam. Thank you for the question. So I think definitely the series would work better on television because the books are complex and it would give you space to unpack all of those complexities. And it's been out on submission for film and TV a few times. I had a deal at one point with Lionsgate that kind of went away because the person who was most passionate about the series unfortunately passed away. So now we're out on submission with those books again. And I'm, you always, as every writer is hoping someone finds something in their books and will pick them up and want to film them. But I was thinking, especially recently, because we were seeing so many publishers put out these, very encouraging statements in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and talking about how now we're going to stand behind our authors of color and promote the kinds of stories that they're telling and hire people in-house as well, editors and everyone who works on a book. We're going to think about all the different perspectives in the room. And I think that's fabulous. It's really encouraging. But I would like to say that I have been writing a series about the over-policing of minority communities for more than 5 years. So it would be great to see a series like that to pick up some traction because my characters go into all these different communities and look at the over-policing and in some cases police neglect, in some cases police brutality. So it would be great to see some of that get a little bit more attention or traction now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, and I think I share that sort of similar frustration where it's like it's so great to see attention and light on this now, but where the heck has everybody been for the past 5, 10, 15 years? Hello, wake up.
And I would also like to shout out my colleagues at Crime Writers of Color who really brought this issue to the forefront, done a lot of important work. And I'm especially really happy to see a lot of Black writers writing crime fiction and getting a platform like Sean Cosby with Blacktop Wasteland or Kelly Garrett with her Hollywood Homicide series. It's great to see those stories now out in the mainstream. And I hope that readers will support them and find them interesting and take away the lessons of reading more diversely.
Absolutely. We had John Vercher on here a month or so ago. He's amazing. He's getting all sorts of awards. Chicago Tribune Best Book of the Year for his book 3/5. Yeah, there's been such Patricia Shanae was on here as well. So it is so important to have diverse voices, and I'm so happy to see them getting more light and attention and awards and accolades and all of that as well. Rena says, this was such a meaningful interview. So happy to have been able to watch it. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Rena. Aisha says, Ausma is both historically and politically informed. Amen. Yes, you are, Ausma. It has been such a joy speaking with you. I feel like I have learned so much. My brain has been massaged. I've learned so much. My heart has been opened. And it has been truly such a joy to speak with someone who's so incredibly thoughtful and takes the time and the care to bring this much research and this much attention and this much thoughtful detail to the table. So thank you so much for this. It's been absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation and a great opportunity. I so appreciate it. And thank you to all the readers who came by and other writers and who chimed in and asked these great questions. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Hey, well, thank you, mighty mystery fans. Thank you to my partner in crime. Get it? Because we're a mystery and crime series here. My partner in crime, Jenna Blum, New York Times bestselling author, who is manning things on the Facebook side of things. My partner in crime. Thank you, Jenna. I honor you and honor your work, and thank you for your support on this. Ausma, thank you again for your time. This has been incredible. Mighty Mystery fans, we will see you next time, actually at 4 o'clock with Megan Abbott and Deborah Jo Immergut. So stick around. We've got some great interviews coming out. Thank you so much and have a great day.